My name is Lucas, and this is Chapter 2 of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone for the audiobook of Harry Potter. The Vanishing Glass. Nearly 10 years have passed since the Dursleys had woken up to find their nephew on the front step, but Pivot Drive had hardly changed at all. The sun rose, same time, tidy front gardens, and lit up the brass number 4 on the Dursleys' front door. They crept into their living room, which was almost the exact same as it had been on the night Mr. Dursley had seen that fateful news report about the owls. Only the photographers on the mantelpiece really showed how much time had passed. 10 years ago, there had been lots of pictures of what looked like a large pink beach ball wearing different colored bonnets. But Dudley Dursley was no longer a baby, and now the photograph showed a large blond boy riding his first bicycle on a carousel at the fair, playing a computer game with his father, being hugged and kissed by his mother. The room held no sign at all that another boy lived in the house too. Yet Harry Potter was still there, asleep at that moment. But for long, his Aunt Petunia was awake. It was her shrill voice that made first noise of the day. Up! Get up! Now! Harry woke up with a start. His aunt rapped on the door again. Up! She screeched. Harry heard walking towards the kitchen, and then the sound of the frying pan being put on the stove. He rolled onto his back and tried to remember the dream he had been having. It had been a good one. There had been a flying motorcycle, and he had a funny feeling he'd had the same dream before. His aunt was back outside the door. Are you up yet? She demanded. Nearly, said Harry. Well, get a move on. I want you to look after the bacon. And don't you dare to let it burn. I want everything perfect on Duddy's birthday. Harry groaned. What did you say? His Aunt Petunia snapped through the door. Nothing. Dudley's birthday. How could he have forgotten? Harry got slowly out of bed and started looking for socks. He found a pair under his bed, and after pulling a spider off one of them, he put them on. Harry was used to spiders because the cupboard under the stairs was full of them, and that was where he slept. When he was dressed, he went down the hall into the kitchen. The table was almost hidden beneath Dudley's birthday presents, as it looked as Dudley had gotten a new computer. He wanted not to mention the second television and the racing bike. Exactly why Dudley wanted a racing bike was a mystery to Harry, as Dudley was very fat, hated exercises, unless, of course, it involved punching somebody. Dudley's favorite punching bag was Harry, but he couldn't often catch him. Harry didn't look it, but he was very fast. Perhaps it had something to do with the living in the dark cupboard, but Harry had always been small and skinny for his age. He looked even smaller and skinnier than he really was, because all he had were clothes of Dudley's, and Dudley was about 4 times bigger than he was. Harry had a very thin face, knobby knees, black hair, and bright green eyes. He wore round glasses held together with a lot of Scotch tape because all the times Dudley had punched him on the nose. The only thing Harry liked about his own appearance was the very thin scar on his forehead that shaped like a bolt of lightning. He had it as long as he could remember, and the first question he could ever remember asking his Aunt Petunia on how he got in the crash when your parents died, she said. And don't ask questions. Don't ask questions? That was the very first rule for a quiet life with the Dursleys. Uncle Vernon entered the kitchen as Harry was turning over the bacon. Comb your hair, he barked. By the way, morning of greeting, about once a week, Uncle Vernon looked over the top of his newspaper and shouted that Harry needed a haircut. Harry must have had more haircuts than the rest of the boys in his class put together. But it made no difference. His hair simply grew that way all over the place. Harry was frying eggs. By the time Dudley arrived in the kitchen with his mother, Dudley looked a lot like Uncle Vernon. He had a large pink face, not much neck, small watery blue eyes, and thick blonde hair that lay smoothly on his thick fat head. Aunt Petunia often said that Dudley looked like a baby angel. Harry often said that Dudley looked like a pig in a wig. Harry put the plates of an egg and bacon on the table, which was difficult as there wasn't much room. Dudley, meanwhile, was counting his presents. His face fell. 36! He looking up at his mother and father. That's 2 less than last year. Darling, you haven't counted Aunt Maggie's present. It's here under this big one from Mummy and Daddy. All right, that's 37, said Dudley, going red in the face. Harry, who could see a huge Dudley tantrum coming on, began wolfing down his bacon as fast as possible in case Dudley turned the table over. Aunt Petunia obviously sensed danger too, because she said quickly, "And we'll buy you another 2 present when you're out today. How's that, Popkin? 2 more presents? Is that all right?" Dudley thought for a moment. He looked like hard work, and finally he said slowly, "So I'll have 39 sweetums," said Aunt Petunia. Oh, Dudley sat down and heavily and grabbed the nearest parcel. "All right, then," Uncle Vernon chuckled. Little Trike wants his money worth, just like, his father's. That's a boy, Dudley. He ruffled Dudley's hair. At that moment, the telephone rang, and Aunt Petunia went up to answer it, while Harry and Uncle Vernon watched Dudley unwrap a racing bike, a video camera, a remote-controlled airplane, 60 new computer games, a VCR. He was ripping the paper off a gold wristwatch. Then Aunt Petunia came back from the phone and looking both ways, angry, worried. "Bad news, Vernon," she said. "Mrs. Figg's broken her leg. She can't take him." She jerked her head in Harry's direction. Dudley's mouth fell open in a hurry, but Harry's heart gave a leap. Every year on Dudley's birthday, his parents took him to a friend out for the day, to adventure parks, hamburger restaurants, or movies. Each year, Harry was left behind with Mrs. Figg, a mad old lady who lived 2 streets away. Harry hated it there. The whole house smelled like cabbage, and Mrs. Figg made him look like photographs of the cats she never owned. "Now what?" said Aunt Petunia, looking fiercely at Harry as Mrs. Figg broken her leg. But it wasn't easy when he reminded himself it would be a whole year before he got to look at Tibble, Snowy, Mr. Paws, and Tufty again. "We could phone Marge," Uncle Vernon suggested. "Don't be silly, Vernon. She hates the boy." The Dursleys often spoke about Harry like this, as though he wasn't there, or rather as though he was something very nasty that couldn't understand him, like a slug. "What's her name? Your friend? Yvonne? On vacation in Marijaco," snapped Aunt Petunia. "You could just leave me here," Harry put in hopefully. He'd been able to watch what he had wanted on television for a change, and maybe even a go on Dudley's computer. Aunt Petunia looked as though she just swallowed a lemon. "And come back and find the house in the ruins?" she snarled. "I won't blow up the house," said Harry, but they weren't listening. "I suppose we could take him to the zoo," said Aunt Petunia slowly, "and leave him in the car." That car's new. He's not sitting in it alone." Dudley began to cry loudly. In fact, he wasn't really crying. It had been years since he'd really cried, but he knew that if he screwed up his face and wailed, his mother would give him anything he wanted. stinky duddy-dums. Don't cry. Mommy won't let him spoil your special day, she cried, flinging her arms around him. I don't want him to come, Dudley yelled between huge pretended sobs. He always spoils everything. He shot Harry a nasty grin through the gap of his mother's arms. Just then, the doorbell rang. Oh, good Lord, they're here, said Aunt Petunia frantically. And a moment later, Dudley's best friend, Piers Polkiss, walked in with his mother. Piers was a scrawny boy with a face like a rat. He usually the one who held people's arms behind their backs while Dudley hit them. Dudley stopped, pretending to cry at once. Half an hour later, Harry couldn't believe his luck, was sitting on the back of Dursley's car, with Piers Dudley on the side. On the way to the zoo for the first time in his life, his aunt and uncle hadn't been able to think of anything else to do with him. But before they left, Uncle Vernon had taken Harry aside. I'm warning you, he had said, putting his large purple face right up close to Harry's. I'm warning you, boy, and any funny business, anything at all, you'll be in that cupboard from now until Christmas. I'm not going to do anything, said Harry, honestly. But Uncle Vernon didn't believe him. No one ever did. The problem was strange. Things often happened around Harry, and it was no good telling the Dursleys he didn't make them happy. Once Aunt Petunia, tired of Harry coming back from the bars, looking as though he hadn't been at all, had taken a pair of kitchen scissors and cut his hair so short he had almost been bald, except for bangs, which he left to hide that horrible scar. Dudley had laughed. Dudley had laughed at himself, silly at Harry. He spent a sleepless night imagining the school the next day, where he was already laughed at for his baggy clothes and taped glasses. Next morning, however, Petunia had sheared it off, and he had been given a week in his cupboard for this. Even though he had tried to explain that he couldn't explain how it had grown back so quickly. Another time, Aunt Petunia had been trying to force him onto a revolting old sweater of Dudley's, brown with orange puffballs. The harder she tried to pull it over the head, the smaller it seemed to become, until finally it might have fitted a hand puppet. It certainly wouldn't fit Harry. Aunt Petunia had decided it must have shrunk in the wash, and to his great relief, Harry wasn't punished. On the other hand, he got into terrible trouble for being found on the roof for the school kitchens. Dudley gang had been chasing him at home as usual, as much as Harry surprised anyone else's there to be sitting on the chimney. The Dursleys had received a very angry letter from Harry's head mistress telling them Harry had been climbing school buildings, but all he'd tried to do, as he shouted at Uncle Vernon through the locked door of his cupboard, was a jump behind a big trash cans outside the kitchen doors. Harry supposed that the wind must have caught him in mid-air jump. But today nothing was going to be wrong. It was even worth being with Dudley and Piers to be spending the day somewhat that wasn't school, his cupboard, or Mrs. Fang's cabbage-smelling living room. While he drove to Mrs. Uncle Vernon's, complained to Aunt Petunia. He had liked to complain about things, people at work, Harry the council, Harry the bank, and Harry were just a few of his favorite subjects. This morning, it was motorcycles, roaring along maniacs, those young hoodlums, he said as a motorcycle overtook them. I had a dream about a motorcycle, said Harry, remembering suddenly. It was flying. Uncle Vernon nearly crashed into the car in front of him. He turned right around in his seat and yelled at Harry's face like a gigantic bee with a mustache. "Motorcycles don't fly!" Dudley and Piers sniggered. "I know they don't," said Harry. "It was only a dream." But he had wished he hadn't said anything. If there was one thing the Dursleys hated even more than asking questions, it was his talking about anything acting in the way. No matter if it was a dream or even a cartoon, they seemed to think he might get dangerous ideas. It was a very sunny Saturday. At the zoo was crowded with families. The Dursleys brought Dursley and Piers a large chocolate ice creams at the entrance. And then, because the smiling lady in the van asked Harry what he wanted, before they could hurry him away, they bought him a cheap lemon ice pop. It wasn't bad either. Harry thought, licking it as they watched a gorilla scratching its head, who looked remarkably like Dudley, except that it wasn't blonde. Harry had the best morning he had had in a long time. It was careful to walk a little apart from the Dursleys, so that Dudley and Piers were starting to get bored with the animals by lunchtime. He wouldn't fall back into their favorite hobby of hitting him. They ate in the zoo restaurant, and then Dudley had a tantrum because his Knickerbocker glory didn't have enough ice cream on top. Uncle Vernon bought him another one, and Harry was lowered to finish the first. Harry felt afterward that he should have known it was all too good to last. After lunch, they went to a reptile house. It was cool and dark in there, with lit windows all along the walls. Behind the glass, all sorts of lizards and snakes. They were crawling and slithering over bits of wood and stone. Dudley and Piers wanted to see huge poisonous cobras and thick man-crushing pythons. Dudley quickly found the largest snake in the place. It could have wrapped its body twice around Uncle Vernon's car and crushed it into the trash can. But at the moment, it didn't look in the mood. In fact, it was fast asleep. Dudley stood with his nose pressed against the glass, staring at the glistening brown coils. "Make it move," he whined at his father. Uncle Vernon tapped on the glass, but the snake didn't budge. "Do it again," Dudley ordered Uncle Vernon, rapped on the glass smartly with his knuckles. But just then the snake just snoozed on. "This is boring," Dudley moaned. He shuffled away. Harry moved in front of the tank and looked intently on the snake. He wouldn't have been surprised if it had died of boredom itself. No company except stupid people drumming their fingers on the glass, trying to disturb it all day long. It was worse than having a cupboard as a bedroom. Their only visitor was Aunt Petunia, hammering on the door to wake you up. At last he got a visit to the rest of the house. The snake suddenly opened his beady eyes. Slowly, very slowly, it raised his head until his eyes were level with Harry's. It winked. Harry stared and then looked quickly around to see if anyone was watching. They weren't. He looked back at the snake and it winked too. The snake jerked its head toward Uncle Vernon and Dudley and raised his eyes to the ceiling. It gave Harry a look that sad, quite plainly. "I get that all the time." "I know," Harry murmured to the glass, though he wasn't sure that the snake could hear him. He must really be annoying. The snake nodded briskly. "Where do you come from anyways?" Harry asked. The snake jabbed its tail at a little sign next to the glass. Harry peered. "Boa constrictor, Brazil." "Was it nice there?" The boa constrictor jabbed its tail at the sign again. "Oh, Red Spanish was bred in a zoo. Oh, I see. So you've never been to Brazil?" As the snake shook his head, a deafening shout shot to Harry, made them both. "Dudley! Mr. Dudley! Come on! Look at the snake! You won't believe what it's doing!" Dudley came waddling toward them as fast as he could out of the way, he said, punching Harry in the ribs. Caught by surprise, Harry fell hard on the concrete floor. What came next happened so fast no one saw how it happened. 1 second, Piers and Dudley were leaning right up close to the grass. The next, had leapt with howls of horror. Harry sat up and gasped. The glass front of the boa constrictor's tank had vanished. The gray snake was uncoiling itself and rapidly slithering out onto the floor. People thought the reptile house screamed as it started running for the exits. As the snake slid swiftly past him, Harry could have sworn a low hissing voice, "Bzil, here I come. Thanks, amigo." The keeper of the reptile house was in shock. "But the glass," he kept saying. "Where did the glass go?" The zoo director himself made Aunt Petunia a cup strong of tea while he apologized over and over again. Piers and Dudley could only gibber. As far as Harry had seen, a snake hadn't done anything except snap playfully at their heels as it passed. But by the time they were back all in Uncle Vernon's car, Dudley was telling them how it had nearly bitten off his leg, while Piers was swearing it had tried to squeeze him to death. But the worst of all, for Harry at least, was Piers calming anything to death. Harry was talking to it. "Weren't you, Harry?" Uncle Vernon waited till Piers was safely out of the house before staring at Harry. He was so strong he could hardly speak. He managed to say, "Go, cupboard, stay, no meals," before he collapsed onto the chair, and Aunt Petunia had to run to get him a large brandy. Harry lay in his dark cupboard much later, wishing he had watched. He didn't know what time it was, and he couldn't be sure the Dursleys were asleep yet until they were. He couldn't risk sneaking into the kitchen for some food. He lived with the Dursleys for almost 10 miserable years. As long as he could remember, ever since he's been a baby, his parents died in a car crash. He couldn't remember being in a car when his parents had died. Sometimes when he strained his memory during long hours in the cupboard, he came up with strange vision, a blinding flash of green light and burning pain in his forehead. This, he supposed, was the crash, though he couldn't imagine where all the green light came from. Couldn't remember his parents at all. His aunt and uncle never spoke to him about them, and of course he was forbidden to ask questions. There were no photographs of them in the house. When he had been younger, Harry had dreamed of some unknown relation coming to take him away, but it had never happened. The Dursleys were his only family, yet sometimes he thought, or maybe hoped, that strangers in the street seemed to know him. Very strange strangers they were, too. A tiny man in a violet top hat bowed to him once while shopping with Aunt Petunia and Dudley. After asking Harry fiercely if he knew the man, Aunt Petunia had rushed him out of the shop without buying anything. A wild-looking old woman, dressed all green, had waved merrily at him once on a bus. A bald man in a very long purple coat had actually shaken his hand in the street. The other day he had walked away without a word. The weirdest thing about all these people, they seemed to vanish the second Harry tried to get a closer look. At school, Harry had no one. Everybody knew that Dudley's gang hated that odd Harry Potter in his baggy clothes and broken glasses, and nobody liked to disagree with Dudley's gang. And that is the end of Chapter 2 of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, and come back for Chapter 3 next time.